During the siege of Terra, the traitor forces came with a plan to take the Saturnine wall, with 4 teams tunneling deep below the wall to attack from behind. There had to be an attack on the wall itself to distract the defenders from the real threat, and Fulgrim, primarch of the Empress Children, committed his entire 3rd Legion for that. Let's see what happened. There seemed to be nothing but a cold, silent night. The Saturnine wall was a significant south-facing section of the Great Ultimate Wall, 1100 meters high and 400 meters thick. It ran like a sea cliff for nearly 30 kilometers between the Europa and Western projection sections, though the light shock and distant boom of the endless bombardments at those sections rippled through the chill air. At Owen's Tower, Saturnine's principal gun bastion, it was quiet. A pitch, storm-heavy darkness hung over the wall and the plains beyond. The air was sub-zero and dropping with wind chill. Hoar frost was forming on the sleek, black barrels of the macro guns and the armored shells of the casemates and turrets. The voids at optimal output flickered and shimmered the night air, their skeins of charged particles occasionally conjuring aurorae colors that shifted and slid. "Stand by, trickster," said Captain Madias, the Imperial Fist, one of the newborn, new-made legionaries produced by accelerated recruitment to swell the Terran ranks, handed the link back to his waiting Vox officer, and hurried along the wall. He had been appointed Wall Master of the Saturnine stretch 8 days previously. "Come to alert," he said to his sergeant as he passed him. He had 500 Imperial Fists on the wall line and 2,000 soldiers of the Auxilia, not counting the hundreds of gun crews, loaders and technical support personnel. Madias entered the wall guard fire control station at the junction of the main wall and Owen's Tower. The vigil officers and gunnery masters were all on station, as they had been every day and every night since the start of the siege. The room stirred. Men started speaking urgently into their vox links. Amber runes began to flash silently over the hatch frames and on the wall pillars. One by one, hololithic screens blinked into light in the air, scrolling with preparatory target data. Madias heard the whine of turrets realigning, the clatter of hatches opening on casemates and down wall gun boxes. He heard the rising thrum of power as reactors fast-fed power to the primary energy weapon banks, and the ticking of vast quantities of projectile munitions streaming out of the magazine chambers deep in the girth of the wall. A scream tore through the chamber. It was so shrill and so loud, glass panels shattered spontaneously, consoles shorted out, hololithic projector blades disintegrated into fragments. The noise suppression systems of those present wearing helmets kicked in automatically, saving them from the worst of it, but the personnel without helmets went into seizure. They collapsed across consoles or onto the deck, blood running from their wounded ears, out of their noses, out of their tear ducts and the corners of their mouths. The scream persisted for 6 seconds, until all the chamber speakers blew out in flurries of sparks and ruptured components. "Stations!" Madias yelled. His head was still ringing. He could feel blood trickling inside his helm. Medicae were dragging the injured clear. Some were still screaming. Support staff were rushing in to take over their positions. Madias cursed. He strode out of the chamber, yanking the plug out of his helm and casting the cable aside. Outside, he ran on the wall's main bulwark. Space Marines were already in place, manning wall weapons or braced with bolt guns ready. "Incoming!" Sergeant Kask reported, pointing. Madias looked into the darkness, cycling the gain of his visor's optics. The dungeon-class siege engine was an uncommon machine. made by the Forge of Mars in the early years of the Great Crusade. Its pattern had seen service in many theaters, though it had never been produced in significant numbers due to its bulk, cost of production, and cumbersome vulnerability on the field of war. Better doctrines, exploiting the fluid versatilities of the Legion's Astartes and the rapid aggression of the Titan engines, had consigned the dungeon to support and real-line operations that it had not originally been designed to perform. The dungeon engine was a quadruped, striding on a brace of the same motivator systems that propelled warlord-class machines. The four massive legs supported a huge, flat-top carrier deck, a platform large enough for a squadron of aircraft or a full motorized company. The platform's rim bristled with heavy gun ports, and through-deck elevators were equipped with bulk machinery that could lift extending siege towers and scaling bridges to the highest battlements. But the dungeon was slow, painfully hard to maneuver, and its void systems were overextended because of its mass and prone to gaping. First Captain Abaddon had procured 3 of the immense rare beasts from the adepts of the Dark Mechanicum, and he had given them to the Phoenician Lord of the Emperor's Children. The 3 behemoths trudged towards the Saturnine wall, relentlessly advancing over the ragged, lifeless plain. At the heels came streams of armored support, troop carriers, motorized mortars, wall breaker gun carriages, and assault belfry lifters. Range locked, the advancing giants began to fire. Plasma destructor mounts and the inferno guns along the platform rims started to retch and spit spearing pulses and beams of annihilation. Mega bolters shrilled as they unleashed blizzards of explosive ordnance. Launch racks dispensed streams of darting anti-void missiles. Bulk Laos blasters pumped in their arrestor frames as they kicked out giant spears of light. The face of the Saturnine wall around Owen's tower lit up as the storm of incoming fire kissed the shields. Vast black flash blinked as the void struggled to absorb the bombardment. The wall guns responded immediately, some systems keying to automatic threat registers, others manually commanded. Casemates, gun boxes in the tiered flank of the wall, and main wall top batteries commenced a staggering onslaught of defensive fire, raking and pummeling the forward voids of the plodding stoic giants. Madius, waiting for the hard link to be repaired, watched the catastrophic exchange. It was his first time facing mass-scale assault. It was his first time in any combat. Few in the palace had ever seen a dungeon stride into war. They were awe-inspiring Leviathan machines, terrible in aspect, but he had studied. He knew their weaknesses and the compounding vulnerabilities that meant they were seldom used. It was all very impressive, but he was sure the wall's devastating firepower would crack their shields and bring them all down, burning and torn, well short of the ramparts. The Phoenician had made some changes to the siege engines he had been loaned. His sound rights, inspired by acoustic nightmares whispered to them by the Neverborn, had masked the approach of the bulk engines in sonic fields that had turned the air opaque and wrapped the dungeons in manufactured night from 30 kilometers out. The profligate gossips of Slanesh had blurted secrets of noise death to the disciples of the cacophony in their dreams, and psychosonic weapons had been fashioned and tuned, blasting their insanities from the 4 decks of the siege engines through gaping chromed vents and broadcasting them on every frequency from infra to ultra. The roar of the Carnadon contains frequencies of less than 20 Hz below the threshold of human hearing, but the effects are still felt. The consequence is paralyzing terror, pinning the prey. The prattling tattletales of the Slanishi feathered dreams had gibbered this secret to the cacophony too, and the Emperor's children had made fluted aramite horns which sounded a dirge that provoked cold sweat, inescapable dread. Madius shuddered. He was newborn and untried, but he was resolved. He felt a shock wave, a concussive rush of pressure. Sections of the aegis above them had failed and collapsed. The voids were tearing like thin silk. Immediately, enemy fire penetrated. Mega bolter sprays raked the bulwark. Pulses of heavy lass struck the allure, the fighting step, and the rear parapet. Men were hurled into the air in geysers of flame. A plasma beam lanced in and obliterated a gun turret entirely. "Maintain barrage!" Madius yelled, but no one could hear him. The air was screaming around him. He ran towards the fire control station. Approaching the wall, the striding dungeons dropped their voids. They began to take crippling damage immediately along their forward hulls, but it no longer mattered. They were less than a kilometer out. Launch units mounted on the platforms' decks began to fire, pitching drop pods into the air. Some were deflected by the shredding voids, others were incinerated by the firmer sections of the shields, but many arced down onto the wall top, glittering the rockreed as they impacted, claw legs dragging and gouging. Some struck the face of the wall and fell, but then clung on, their landing claws becoming bristled hooks and grotesque arachnid legs. They began to climb the sheer wall like mites, or haul themselves into the open maws of mid-tier gun boxes. Empress children were emerging on the wall top, purple, gold, pink, black, screaming their death hymns and blasting their weapons. The Imperial fists turned from the wall, hammering bolter fire at the disgorging drop pods, cutting down the arriving enemy and being cut down in turn. Madius's bolt gun was in his hand. He snapped off shots at nearby targets. Sonic booms rolled across Oannes like thunder cracks. Pockets of darkness popped open along the fighting platform, and figures dropped out of fissures that sound had warped and torn. The champion elite of the Third. Warriors too beautiful and ornamented to behold, they fell out of the warp fissures, which crumbled and closed behind them like the petals of black roses, then vanished like smoke, leaving only lingering snatches of choral plain song behind them. The figures fell, graceful, and landed on the wall on their feet, at a pace no quicker than a fast walk. One dropped directly in the center of the wide wall deck. It was larger than the rest, clad in a panoply of artificer armor, wrought in heliotrope and amaranthine, etched in gold. It landed in a crouch, its right hand clutching a slender, two-handed single-edged blade. Fulgrim rose slowly to his feet, his long white hair unwound and ribboned out behind him in the night wind, like a pennant of shining satin. He tipped his head back, beheld the devastation, and smiled. His teeth gleamed in the firelight. His long white hair blew out in the night wind, dancing like the vast tongues of flames above him. "You are very young," he said. He crouched beside the Imperial fist sprawled on the wall top. "Very young, new to this," he whispered. Madius was trying to crawl. His bones were as broken as his war plate. He had lost his helm somewhere, and his face was drenched in blood. Every shaking move took supreme effort. Every centimeter he dragged himself through the slick of his own blood was a triumph of will. "Are you trying to escape?" Fulgrim asked. He tutted. "I don't think you're supposed to do that. Your father doesn't like it. You're supposed to stand and fight. But then you're new. Maybe no one's had the time to tell you the rules." The Phoenician looked around, across the broad top of the Saturnine wall. His children were massacring the wall guard garrison. Still more of his children were arriving through the void breach, via drop pods or scaling the bulwarks from wall-based deployments. The Sonance had shut down. The guns of the Saturnine wall, still firing, had begun to disintegrate the vulnerable dungeons, destroying all the beautiful instruments they carried. The siege engines were collapsing in vast fire clouds that lit up the face of the wall like sunrise. It was a shame, but the carriers and the instruments had finished their performance anyway. The 3rd Legion were in. They had claimed a rampart of the ultimate wall. "I'll tell you this," said Fulgrim gently. "Even if you could run, and you can't with those poor legs of yours. Mind, I don't think you could escape. There is no sanctuary here." He glanced at the palace beyond them. "Soon there won't be any sanctuary anywhere," he added. He looked down at the Imperial Fist again. Madius was still crawling, gasping and straining with each tiny movement he managed to make. "Poor frightened child," Fulgrim said. There. His face darkened. "Oh, I see. You're not trying to escape. You're trying to reach that." He glanced at the chipped gladius that lay a meter or so in front of the young captain. Madius's bloody fingers were clawing towards it. Fulgrim stood up. "You don't want that. I've got a much nicer one." He drew his long single-edged sword and took it in a two-handed grip. "See?" he said. He raised his arms to strike. Something hit him. Something cannoned into him and staggered him backwards. Something hacked at him. Something was hurting him. Fulgrim ranged backwards. Sigismund kept swinging, his power blade scoring and cracking Fulgrim's beautiful armor. "Get off!" Fulgrim exclaimed. "Get away from me!" He was 3 times the Templar's size. He kicked out, like a man kicking at an aggressive dog, and knocked Sigismund backwards. Sigismund rolled and came back to his feet. He swung his blade, two-handed, into Fulgrim's thigh. The Phoenician shrieked, more in indignation than pain. The shriek was attuned across strange pitches, and it shivered the stones of the wall. He snatched Sigismund up by the throat with one hand. The blade, still bound to Sigismund's wrist by its chains, pulled out of the wound. Choking, Sigismund grabbed the dangling blade and struck repeatedly at the giant holding him. He lopped off a lock of the Phoenician's hair, then cut his lip. Fulgrim shrieked again and flung Sigismund away. The Templar sailed 5 meters, hit the wall of Ornis Tower, and dropped onto the platform. "How dare you!" Fulgrim yelled, striding towards where Sigismund lay. He staunched his split lip with one hand and spun his long sword in the other. "Sigismund's courage sometimes outstrips his abilities." Fulgrim stopped. He turned. He smiled with blood-pink teeth. Dorn glared back at him. He flexed his grip on his raised greatsword. "Mine doesn't," said Dorn. Madius beheld it all. Propped up against a broken pillar, he watched his Praetorian's wrath unleashed. "Your pretty wall is broken, Rogol," Fulgrim declared. He lashed his blade into Dorn's shield and drew splinters. "Your famous fortress is undone. Dorn's blow knocked the words out of his mouth. Fulgrim stumbled. Dorn's great sword tore into his ribs. Fulgrim struck back, but found only shield again. "You're a man in a broken tower," Fulgrim taunted and spat out blood. "You stand so proud and so defiant, ignoring the fact that the tower is falling around you. It will—" Another blow. Fulgrim staggered away, then spun, head lowered, hair bellowing, keeping his distance. Dorn lunged anyway, driving his shield into body and face. Fulgrim threw him off and leapt aside. "So silent, Rogol. No words of denial, no pleading for me to change my foolish ways and come back at ya. You can tell me it's not too late. You can promise me sweet forgiveness. Dorn blocked into him, broke his guard with his shield, buried his blade in Fulgrim's shoulder meat, then body smashed him across the platform. Deeds are my words, Dorn said. Fulgrim nodded and spat blood again. Always, he agreed, licking blood off his teeth. You were never the wit, never one for fine conversation, just hard at work and... Dorn broke his guard again with another lunge, carving a chunk of blade from Fulgrim's flank. Fulgrim surged and hammered out 9 rapid blows, each one a master kill stroke. Dorn blocked each one. Their blades flew, ringing against each other, drawing sparks. Fulgrim danced backwards. Dorn advanced. Fulgrim wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and smeared blood across his cheek. Are you really not going to try and convince me? Asked Fulgrim. That I have made a mistake. Talk me back into the fold where I can make amends. Dorn surged and threw 2 rapid blows that Fulgrim only blocked with effort. No, said Dorn. He struck again, a low slice that Fulgrim buried, then a high back cut that tore through Fulgrim's gorget and scattered broken rings of golden mail. I'm just going to kill you, said Dorn. The Phoenician growled and charged 2 steps. Dorn met his first slash with his shield and countered his second with his blade. A third he buried. A fourth he turned aside in a squealing slide of steel that threw off sparks. Fulgrim backed off, arms spread, circling. Are you now? Fulgrim said. How bold, how empty! Look around! Dorn's glare remained fixed on Fulgrim. He feinted a step, a bait Fulgrim took, then rammed the Phoenician with his shield and hammered 2 blows into his ribs with his pommel before they broke contact again. I said look around! Fulgrim snapped. Blood was streaming from his wounds, rolling down his gashed armor. Some had got in his hair. He tossed his sword from hand to hand, then seized the grip with both and hacked down at Dorn. Dorn blocked with a raised shield, turned out and raked his blade deep across Fulgrim's chest. Fulgrim stumbled clear. Look around! Look around! See what's happening, Rogel dolt! Your tower is tumbling down. No more running to daddy crying. Look! Look what I have built! It took you years to make this, and in one night I rolled down upon you, crack your shield and build a foothold. Dorn stamped at him, and they traded 4 swift blows that chimed like bells. Look, said Dorn. His gaze did not shift from Fulgrim's face. I don't have to. I see it all. Oh, what? Snarled Fulgrim. He swung. Dorn turned the blade aside. I see your siege machines burning at the foot of the wall, said Dorn. I see your sonic weapons silenced. I see your host, foolishly committed in its entirety, pouring into a run of wall that can be held by a force 1/10 that size. Their blades flashed and rang again. Dorn lost a chunk of shield. Fulgrim took a laceration to the shoulder, and is held by a force 1/10 that size, said Dorn calmly. Imperial fists, now boasted by the 200 legions Astartes veterans I brought with me, 200 veterans who are skilled in every doctrine of war, who have rallied this garrison and this wall stretch, and are now slaughtering the vanguard you so wantonly committed. They thank you for giving them such a wealth of bodies to reap. You have no foothold. I have! Fulgrim roared. He smashed his blade at Dorn, a series of furious strokes. Dorn buried them away, Only one got through and gouged his shoulder guard. "No," said Dorn, as they circled again. "You're a fine fighter, but a poor strategist. You committed everything against a gap that could be held. You have burned the cream of your host for nothing, made them cannon fodder, 9,000 dead and counting. I know, Fulgrim. I know everything." "You know nothing!" Fulgrim cried. He railed in, and his gleaming blade sliced the flesh above Dorn's right eye. Dorn caved his ribs with the edge of his shield, punched him in the face with his sword's guard, and kicked him backwards. "You have let yourself be used as a distraction," said Dorn, keeping his gaze on his adversary, ignoring the blood pouring down his face. "You have let your host be decimated for nothing. The Saturnine ruse, I know about that too, has failed. Bertrabo played his move and lost his peace. You're just a pawn. Was it the Lord of Iron who fooled you into this? Lubrical? Abaddon. You must have been willing. Were you getting bored with it? The spear tip is broken. You're holding a gate for no one. You're just an idiot standing on a wall." Fulgrim's eyes widened very slightly. "It failed?" he whispered. Dorn sliced, and Fulgrim cabered clear. "I am not trapped here," said Dorn. "I am not under siege today. You are, and that's why I'm going to kill you." The Praetorian swung. Fulgrim parried. Dorn followed in, and the great sword tore Fulgrim's cheek open. The Phoenician stabbed frantically, splitting armor and lacerating Dorn's side. Dorn struck out and severed Fulgrim's left wrist, so the hand was left hanging by a shred of flesh. Dorn drove the entire length of his blade through Fulgrim's belly. They stood for a moment as though embracing, the length of Dorn's sword spearing out from Fulgrim's spine, steam rising from the blade. Fulgrim rested his bloody cheek on Dorn's shoulder and sighed. Dorn ripped the sword out and stepped clear. "Well," whispered Fulgrim, blood spattering out of his mouth. "What a mess!" He straightened up, gore running from his torn face and broken plate. "It really failed, then, the Marneval plan?" he asked. "It did. They are all dead." "Oh!" Fulgrim smiled as much as his butchered face would allow. Teeth were visible through the slash in his cheek. "You do fine work," he said. "I wanted a scalp," said Dorn. "I wanted his head, Lubrical, but you came instead. A traitor primarch. I'll make do with you." "All these things you know," said Fulgrim. "So very able and informed. But there are things you don't." "Name one," said Dorn. "One. I can't die." He stared at Dorn, his wounds closed, the skin reknitting without a scar, his dangling hand refused. His armor fixed itself and regained its luster. His blood dried up and blew away as dust. "Two," he said. "I am sick of all this, all of it. The others can find a way to grind you down and bring your fortress low. I cannot die, but I feel the pain, and I won't take any more of it." He sheathed his blade. His form began to grow, stretching its dimensions with an earthly inner light. His legs fused like flowing wax, and he became, from the waist down, a gigantic serpent. The thick loops of his snaking lower body coiled out across the stonework. Scales gleaming like mother of pearl, he rose up, his lamia form towering over the Praetorian. There were scales around his eyes and cheek, and his tongue was forked. Dorn stared back up. He did not take a step backwards, but his eyes narrowed and his grip on his sword tightened. There were no words for the impossibility of what he was seeing with his own eyes. 3, said Fulgrim, no longer smiling. I hope our father burns when the time comes. I hope Lobrical turns him into a screaming corpse, but you won't see that, Trogl. You're the one who dies here. The Phoenician turned, and his huge form glided away towards the parapet. He surged off the edge. Black rose petals opened in the air, swallowed him, and vanished. Dorn turned slowly. They had formed a ring around him. Eidolon, Von Kada, Lycus Fadion, Jaqen Darrell, Quinn Milosar, Nunu Didona, and 50 other gleaming warriors of the Emperor's Children Elite Guard. Dorn shook out his shoulders and raised his sword and shield. Try me, he said. They rushed him. They tested him. Eidolon was the worst by far. The Howling Lord Commander fractured Dorn's war blade with his polyphonic screams. His blade pierced the Praetorian twice. Eidolon had the strength of a primarch. Dorn had slain 16 of the killers. They were on him 2 or 3 at a time, raking and jabbing. Dorn's shield, already shredded, was hooked away by one of Quinn Milosar's chrome sabers. Milosar's blade reach was extreme. Dorn knew he had to kill him fast, so he could concentrate on the others. Milosar's head came spinning off in a shower of peacock feathers. The squirts of blood from his severed neck shot meters into the air. Sigismund said nothing, turning from Milosar's toppling form to smash his blade into Janvar Kill. As Kill collapsed, the Templar yelled a war cry, but it had no words. It was just a howl of defiance. He dispatched the champion Jaqen Darrell with 2 hacking blows. The Praetorian and the Templar slotted back to back, covering each other's guard, turning together to drive away the circle of killers. They deflected cuts and thrusts, snapped golden spears, and endured the keening, concussing screams. To the glory of him on earth! Dorn roared. To the death! Sigismund shouted. They smashed the gaudy, lethal champions of the third down, one by one. Von Kada, who bellowed an adult's death scream from his child's face. Elaris, who crawled on all fours for several seconds, searching for his severed head. Semamus, whose body split apart as Dorn caught him. Zenab, who fell to his knees and tried to hold his sheer body together with both arms. Lycus Fadion, the Vixilarius, who was sent cartwheeling away in a welter of blood. When Eidolon surged in again, Sigismund charged him out of the circle, knocking men aside. The 2 fought like furies along the edge of the wall. Both possessed, but only one a demon. When Eidolon, gleeful, lammed his sword through Sigismund's collarbone, Sigismund snarled, seized the bare blade impaling him, and used his body weight to tear it out of Eidolon's grip. Eidolon looked appalled as Sigismund came on. The sword wedged through his shoulder. He scrambled backwards. The Templar's chain blade ripped Eidolon's pink plate open. Blood, like quicksilver, like liquid chrome, sprayed out and doubled Sigismund's armor. Eidolon screamed. Sigismund kicked him over the ledge. The Lord Commander's flailing body plunged away 1100 meters down into the burning darkness below the Saturnine wall. By then, Dorn had felled another 9 with his great sword. Their bodies lay around him like the ransacked contents of a jewel box. Nunu Didona, famed for his cunning, tried to slip in behind Dorn as the Praetorian fought off 2 others. Maximus Thane broke Didona's back with his hammer, then smashed his head into the wall top for good measure. The wall guard, a mix of Imperial fists and auxiliary troops led by members of the kill teams Devotion and Helios, had cleared the lower galleries and driven the Emperor's children out of the wall, either into the night or into the arms of death. Below, the ravaged host of the 3rd Legion, perhaps in answer to some petulant summons from the fleeing lord, began to withdraw. They left some 18,000 of their dead behind. The last to die were on the wall top, as Thane's garrison scoured out the last pockets of resistance beneath the burning flanks of Owen's gun tower. Bohemond was with them, trudging and snarling, blitzing fire from his gun pods to mow down the last few of the killer elite that menaced his beloved Praetorian lord. There was cheering when the voids flared back into life overhead. The breach repaired, weary, bloodied men lined the wall under the aurora shimmer, shouting the war cry of the 7th defiantly at the night beyond the wall. A few last confirmation shots echoed around the battlement. Dorn crouched beside the broken form of the new blood Magius. "The apothecaries are coming, my son," he told him. "Did we win, my lord?" Magius asked. "This is what victory feels like, War Master," said Dorn. "I'll make damn sure you live long enough to get used to it." "What did we win, Praetorian?" asked the captain through a film of his own blood. "The day," Dorn replied. Alright guys, if you stayed this far, support the channel by a like, a comment for the algorithm, and don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned for more of Warhammer 40,000 lore.